Welcome back, everyone. It's my pleasure now to introduce our next presenter, although with the number of the numerous webinars under his belt, Chris Ritson will probably be known to many of the people on the call already. So Chris was risk manager for UK infrastructure, working in this space for highways, rail, electrification, metro stations, tunnelling, and the corporate HQ. Chris received awards for his performance and innovation before joining Safran back in 2019, where he now educates trains in all areas of risk and QR, whilst really having a large part in influencing the software development at Safran and the project controls community in its own right. It's a real pleasure to introduce Chris today. Chris's title of his presentation is Doing a Lot with a Little, proving a concept before scaling up, and I will now hand the session over to Chris.
All right, thanks, Craig, and hello, everybody. I'll share my screen, but that's exactly right. I'm going to be doing a presentation on doing a lot with a little. So if anyone doesn't know me, and you probably have seen me, as Craig was alluding to, I guess Glenn and Fred at Safran, they trained me. I trained Doug over at Ferryfield, and that's kind of how all this kind of comes about. And the presentation is going to focus on the cost module. So I really enjoyed watching Michael's presentation just now, because it spoke to something that I often mention in my presentations, which is actually when we're doing estimate uncertainty on projects, where do you get your information from? It's an excellent question. Certainly the projects I used to work on, we used to have a giant spreadsheet with all the subcontractors that were on there. So we actually had some evidence to go back to why we're putting on certain ranges for estimate uncertainty. But while Michael's focused kind of on the schedule, I'm going to be focusing a little bit more on the cost and then the cost schedule integration. And if you want to know more about the cost model or the module, there is a training series. So it's had over 10,000 views so far. I checked yesterday. I put it out there in 2023, and I'm told it's pretty good. So I would point you in that direction. So if you're wanting to get into Safran risk, oh yes.
Sorry to jump in, Chris. I'm not sure. Are you supposed to have shared something on your screen at the moment? Because I've just got a black screen, and you as a very small thumbnail on the right hand side.
Well, that's not very good, is it? Let's see.
Everyone else is saying that they can see the screen, so actually, maybe it's
just you.
Yeah, maybe. No, it's just me. Yeah,
I think it's the presenters, though. I can't see it either, but if everyone else can, that's great.
I can't see it either. Maybe it's just the presenters can't see it.
Oh, I think maybe on gallery view. Well, the main thing is that we've got lots of engaged attendees who are all saying, "I can see the screen, I can see the screen, I can see the screen." So thank you, thank you everybody for that. Carry on, Chris. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. So yes, so hopefully you can see the screen now. I am sharing the only screen I have. I've not got two screens set up or anything. It's just me and the laptop here. So anyway. So yes, so this was 2023 that this training series went out onto YouTube. So I highly recommend going back to that if any of you are inspired, and I hope to inspire you today with what I'm about to show you, because a lot of the lessons in how to build a cost module is found in there. So what happened then in 2024, so this was going to just last year, I had this new demonstration put together. It was inspired by kind of the ways that I used to work and kind of companies I used to work for here in the UK, sort of large civil engineering companies. And they were kind of pitching a similar question. It's kind of like not about during the execution phase of the project, but rather pre-bid, so earlier on. So it was pretty well received. I toured it around the Safran Risk roadshows that we had in Houston, Texas, in Kuala Lumpur, and at Stavanger last year. It went down pretty well. Lots of engaged people there as well. So as I said, it incorporates several lessons from the playlist that you can find on YouTube, and it's framed as this kind of pre-bid, pre-tender. So it's trying to help you with a go, no-go decision when you're looking at your big portfolio of multiple projects. Some are going to win you money and some might lose you money. So you have a portfolio of projects generally in this business. So what this does in effect is it kind of acts as a little bit of a proof of concept in this demonstration for the integrated cost and schedule risk analysis. So that's what the ICSRA is down there. And it kind of proves that if you can do it on something very, very small, then it can be scaled up. So here we are, 2025. This is me revisiting the model now for the first time in a little while. But essentially, to answer this question, will this project make us money? So can we profit from this? So the kinds of projects that I've used were NEC-free contracts. They deploy a thing called a target cost or a target price. And it's to encourage people to correctly forecast and be then incentivized to hit that forecast. So they don't want people necessarily being too late or over budget, and they don't want people being too early and under budget. They want predictability. That's the thing that it was kind of promoting. So the target cost is made up of your cost estimate. So how many bricks are in the wall, multiply that up by a cost per brick. So that's your cost estimate. And then there's going to be a fee added, but some kind of percentage fee for you as a contracting organization to keep the overhead running back home at the head office, as well as adding some profit and things like that. But then there's also the risk allowance. So when you're bidding, you do create these risk models, right? We all kind of know that. That's why we use products like Safran. Now, what can be quite common is that people just build these things in like an Excel spreadsheet. But then there's all these various contractual mechanisms and uncertainties and risks and fluctuations, and some things are going to have more of an outsized influence than others, and that's going to ultimately affect the actual percent margin. Like for every pound or dollar or euro, whatever your currency is that you spend or generate in revenue, how much of that do you get to keep as retained as profit? So that's kind of like the kind of question that we're going to try and answer with this. So we're going to need a bigger model to help answer that, and that's why we use the Monte Carlo risk simulations, and it's why we're going to be using Safran Risk, and I'm going to show you one way of doing that. There's no one size fits all, as was shown on the previous slide. Big fan of that message too. So that target cost, we're going to have to understand aspects of this project in terms of the outturn cost, the revenue generated, and then what actually constitutes the profit, so that we can then divide profit by revenue and understand percent margin. So the kinds of concepts we're going to be looking at in this model are your fee-based costs. So these are things where they're kind of like risks, but if they were to happen, the customer isn't going to pay for them. So if you can be proven to be deliberately negligent, say, or just really incompetent, then there might be grounds for saying we're going to disallow those costs and we're not going to pay for those costs. So the customer might be within their right to say that. So there are certain risks that might happen. There might be some kind of health and safety event or something like this that you wouldn't charge back to the customer and have them seen as part of the original target cost. They'd be kind of considered separate. And then there's other arrangements that will be looked at in terms of the incentivization structure, the pain share and the gain share. There might be aspects of that that are asymmetric, perhaps. Again, these are things you can do in Safran with the aid of formulas. And then you've got these other aspects, of course, coming from the QSRA, so the actual schedule risk analysis and the cost risk analysis coming together into this. So lots of fluctuation, lots of movement. So the QSRA could show that the project finishes earlier, and I'm going to call that and refer to that as curtailment. So if we have a shrunken project schedule, then in theory there's going to be less overhead, less marching army, whatever you want to call those costs, less overhead. So there's a cost saving associated with that. But then equally, if you go in the other direction, you have project prolongation, so it takes longer than expected, then there's going to be additional costs there. But also the contract might hold liquidated damages or delay penalties. So that would have a negative influence on your revenue. And again, your customer is not going to pay for your penalties. So you have to have a way of building your model in such a way that all of these things, all of these moving parts are present and having the desired impact in terms of a modeling behavior. But we don't want to skew the output. So we want to have the correct part of the output shown to the correct audience is effectively what we're saying. So these are the kinds of calculations that are going on behind the scenes in the following model. So how you do build your model, it says you do you here. So like we saw Michael's presentation, he had a way of doing it with his version of parametric. Other companies do other things. I'm not the AACE, so I can't tell you, what to do in terms of how you build your model. So take this with a kind of in the spirit it's intended in terms of I'm just trying to inspire you to show you things that you can do in Safran that you might not have realized that you could do. So while schedule and schedule risk play a big part in this model, it's not really the focus. It's the cost that I'm kind of trying to draw your attention to here and how that works. And the cost module, since I joined Safran, which was nearly almost 6 years ago, has really grown from strength to strength. So hopefully you'll see something there that you haven't seen before. But it looks broadly like this, kind of like an Excel spreadsheet in a way. And we're going to jump into the live tool in a moment, but this just sort of sets the scene a little bit, sort of helps me explain things a little quicker. But you can put in your cost estimate. So we've got a CBS, a cost breakdown structure, and you can have several items, and they can have a defined cost, which you would have in your spreadsheet. You then put estimate uncertainty against those and model it as required. The totals are shown over here and summed up on the summary line items of the CBS. So that's your CapEx and your estimating uncertainty. Then you've got some kind of customer facing risk analysis happening here. So I'm just throwing all of the risks from the risk register in Safran Risk just into a single line item. So these are our direct costs. So if these risks happen, there's a definite direct additional cost added to this. There's a little trick here that if you put a uniform 00 against what is the contingency of 16.3 million in this case, during the simulation, that will zero that off to 0. And then when you run the distribution graph, you actually see the effect of these risks without the 16.3 contingency. So it's a way of showing the contingency as part of the total up here, but zeroing it off during, so you discover the actual cost of the risks during the simulation. So there's a nice little tip there for some people. And then, of course, you've got the QSRA, so the schedule risk analysis part rather than the cost risk analysis. And that's where you've got those terms again, curtailment and prolongation. So the indirect costs, additional costs coming from the schedule. So I've got a formula in here, which are zeroed off because we're not running a simulation at the moment. It is just a screenshot, of course, but we're not running a simulation in this when the screenshot was taken. And what that will do is it will take the number of days. So we're going to link that to a hammock inside the schedule, and that will show the number of days. And then it's just a simple, straightforward multiplication of whatever the number of days in here multiplied by the day rate, which I've decided that I'm going to actually ascertain what it's going to be. So we'll be pretty much symmetrical here. We'll just say it's negative 1650 or positive 1650 is a maximum at either end, whether that's time saving or additional time needed in terms of prolongation. Then that will feed through a cost, and you'll see that later when we get to the step through. And then lower down, and this is the kind of the key thing, is that you can add a top node in the cost breakdown structure. You have more than one. In fact, you have several. So in this case, this is a place where I can put all my calculations for things like the liquidated damages, the margin percentage, and all these other things, the pain gain share relationships and the calculations or the formula that actually helps you understand that part of the model. And you'll see that the fee-based costs, so these are the risks that I said would be disallowable, those can be added accordingly somewhere else. So they're not part of the bit that the customer sees and what they would be happy to pay for, because they were risks identified as being passed down to you, the contractor, to manage, and that's just part of the game or the arrangement. So below that section, if you've not seen the cost model, there's an area where you can start adding custom formulas, like I've got an if statement here and things like that. But also you can see the visualization of how all the risks and things are all kind of coming together, just as you do in the risk mapping screen. So it kind of mirrors that same structure, just for anyone that's not dabbled with that before. So hopefully this kind of proof of concept that I'm going to show you, if it can work for one line item in the schedule, just for simplification, then it can probably work for 10. So if you're very, very early on in the maturity or the life cycle of the actual project itself, then you can sort of scale it up as required. And if it can work for 10, then maybe it can work for 100. And if it can work for that, maybe 1,000 or more, right? So let's jump into the model, have a quick poke around. So I've just sort of deliberately hidden a bunch of the schedule. There's not much, but we'll start with the schedule because that's what most people expect to see when they're going from this left to right workflow. So I've got my duration of the project. It's 610 days, and I'm just literally using a single line item to summarize or represent that. So remember, this is not about a QSRA as such. It's just that it needs to be happening in the background, and it's just there for simplification. And we've got a project start date, and then I've also added this kind of like faint curtain here, this kind of greenish looking curtain that represents our, say, contingency up until the point where liquidated damages start applying, say. So I just bring that down, you'll see there's the finish date. So I've got a couple of milestone markers in for those. And then this is where things get a little more interesting. Bring that down a little further. So this is where I've now introduced a couple of hammocks. And if we change the view to show the links, you can see that hammocks in Safran look like this with two predecessors. So it's connected to the milestone markers here. And then depending on what it's trying to show, if it's curtailment or prolongation or liquidated damages, it's going to link to different aspects of the schedule. Some points are going to just be constrained. So where we expect the schedule to end deterministically, that's going to be anchored in place, and then that's going to help show when we run the simulation with the step through. Why not do that now? If we just run an analysis now, you'll see that as this bar at the top now moves, because it's being driven by a QSRA or a schedule risk, I should say, we've now got these extra hammocks that come to life. This one comes to life when there is prolongation. So it's any time past that anchored point, that milestone there. So that's gone off way into the future. But you can see there's a second hammock. This is our liquidated damages. And that under the contract will start after this date here. So 2nd of 11th. So there's kind of like a grace period where you've got this kind of 2 months, say, of being able to be a bit late on the project. But after that point, you're incentivized to not be later because you're going to be hit by these LDs. So we can see that using the step through, we've got 182 days and 242 days respectively on those two hammocks. So hopefully that kind of makes some sense. You'll see that when we get a reversal, as in there's not prolongation but curtailment, so we've got a project that finishes it earlier, you'll see that this hammock instead, the curtailment calculation, comes on into play. So this one is saving us 39 days, and the other 2 or 3 hammocks have disappeared entirely because there's no prolongation to speak of. So that means if we were to switch over now to the cost model and we had a look and run down, let's just look at the risk analysis, the QSRA, and then there's the curtailment. So you can see there's the same 39 days in here, and it's randomly sampling what from the triangle or the trigen, I guess, what the day rate's going to be, and it's giving you that amount per day. So 39 days multiplied by $153,280, euros, whatever you're using, and that is a 5.9 million saving in this particular iteration of the simulation. So if we keep running that, you'll see that all the numbers are changing and all reacting accordingly. And sometimes there's prolongation and sometimes there's not. Sometimes there's liquidated damages and sometimes there is not. So all of that is holistically being fed through in one model here. And if we scroll over here, just so you can see what's happening with the risks. So those are on that line item. Do you remember I said it would zero off? So the uniform here is zeroing off that contingency. So that's gone to zero, but the total amount of the risks that have actually impacted in terms of cost only risks in this iteration was zero. We can see there's a column called iteration value on the end, and that's zero. If I next step it, you'll see some of these will light up to show that they're impacting, and you'll see the combined cost of those in that cell just there. So this gives you the confidence that the model's behaving the way you're expecting it to, hopefully. And we can see when we got the 15 days here or not. So let's complete that part of the simulation. So just so you can see the rest of it, you've got there's the cost estimate. So I've got just 10 generic items in there. So they are handling the base cost, and then you've got our risk analysis, QCRA, and then the SRA below that. And then all the calculations we'll come back to in a moment. They're happening just below. But let's just complete that simulation. So in terms of the schedule, we've got the overall schedule there, project duration summary. So that's following the profile of the SRA risk that was driving it. So you didn't see that, but we're using either this one here or an alternative one. Just to speak to that a little bit, there's no one size fits all, but you might have the data and the ability to put some kind of estimate uncertainty depending on the size, scale, structure on the schedule risk. In this case, you might use this kind of discrete profile. You might just assign different probabilities to different outcomes based on scenarios that you can envisage, and then say, well, what's the probability that that's going to happen? That's a way of doing it, but other ways do exist as well, of course. So it's an analyze screen which will govern whether you're using the sort of the SRA output, so cumulative distribution output that you can then feed through as an input in this case, or you could switch it over to that one there and use it by the scenario base. There's that button on Microsoft Teams that everyone clicks from time to time. Sorry about that. Distribution graph's what I'm after. So there's our distribution that follows the input. And if we go to our hammocks, so that's what these H's represent over here. This is the curtailment calculation. So this is how many days we could potentially save. So the tallest bar being all the times over 500 iterations when we, of course, were delayed and we had prolongation. But then when we have curtailment and a shorter duration project, that's the profile that it follows. Prolongation profile, similar, very tall bar at the start, all the times when things went in reverse. And then here's the profile for when there was delay, and we can sometimes have much greater delay. You could also potentially go to other parts in the model and look at the combined effects of those things. And we can do that very nicely over here in the cost model. So if we go just switch from the schedule focus to the cost focus now. So we've got our total contract value, which is everything including the fee, which we'll just add 10% fee on top of the outturn cost, which is of course built up from the cost estimate, which have also fed through from the risk analysis, whether that was the direct cost and or the schedule risk analysis. And then if you want to drill down into the prolongation or the curtailment cost savings, so you can see we've got some negative cost numbers here now, you can get that full profile or click it there and get the combined prolongation and curtailment in the same graph. So those are some interesting ways of sort of structuring your cost model. or your CBS to help you look at into those different things and interrogate those accordingly. But the real interesting part really for me is kind of down here in the calculations. So I assume I've got another 5 or 10 minutes to talk about this.
Probably another 5 if we want to get some questions, a couple of questions in as well.
Okay.
Chris. Otherwise, I'll be doing 3 top tips rather than 5 top tips.
Okay, so let's try and answer the first one. So margin percent. So I've used a formula back in the cost model that essentially takes your profit and your revenue, divides it, and then multiplies it by 100, and that converts things into a percentage. So actually along the bottom axis here, you're not looking at cost and you're not looking at time, you're actually looking at a percent. So this is another tips and tricks, I guess. So we've converted the unit effectively. So originally, if you were to do this in an Excel spreadsheet, you were hoping for 11% retention for every pound or dollar that went through your books as revenue. You were hoping to keep 11% of it as profit. You then run a risk simulation, and you can then understand that actually there's a chance that you could be in negative profit and things don't go well for you. Thankfully, in this particular simulation, that's not very likely to happen. We can see most of the bars stack over here, and the S-curve gives us the confidence readout for that. So we can see that we're, say, 80% confident of getting about 14%. So sometimes things can go really positively for us in terms of how much money we can make out of this. But we can begin to answer those kinds of questions. We can look at the pain share, the gain share. The gain share is actually at 20%, so we're only getting to keep 20% of the profits when there are profits to be had. But we have to absorb 50% of the pain. So when we get into that prolongation territory, we're absorbing half of it. When you put that together, combine it into the pain and the gain share in a single graph, you can do that with the formula, just add one to the other. We could investigate the liquidated damages, which only apply after that 2-month grace period is gobbled up, and we go into that. So you can see there's a lot of zeros along this part of the cumulative frequency axis here, and then it comes to life at around 70%. So there's all kinds of different things that you could look in here, target cost deviation. So this is, again, just to sort of inspire you that you could be getting these kinds of readouts on something that's very small. So we don't have the full schedule, but we have something that's sort of driving that. If we jump back to the cost model, just so you can see how those formulas are actually put together. So what I think in this model, I've also used this button up at the top called variables. So I've just defined my target cost as 121 million. So that matches what we've got up here on this kind of like the spreadsheet view, the 121 million total, the deterministic view of the cost. So that's what we're pitching as our target price. And then that can be referenced in the formulas. So it's actually at the bottom here where you've got your general and formulas. So you can add the variables. So that's where my target cost is hiding. So you can add that into the formula. We can add activities from the schedule and return values off of those. So it could be like the number of days or something, or a date. And you can put if statements on these things to trigger a calculation. And then you've got other parts of the cost model. So you can reference, and this is the key thing, is that these calculations here are feeding off of things that are happening above. So in the main customer facing part of the model. So we can refer and cross-refer to different calculations to help us build up more complex formulas. So it has the feel of using something like model risk, at risk, those kinds of things, crystal ball, being able to do those kinds of things in here, but holistically with the schedule, which I think is a huge advantage. So for instance, let's start with profit. What is profit? Well, profit is we're going to take these different things here. So we're going to want our fee, which is from the top of the model. So it's up here, that's the fee. So the fee is 11 million on deterministically speaking, but during the simulation, the fee will grow and shrink as 10% of whatever the revenues are during any given iteration. but we're going to have to minus any fee-based costs. So those were the risks where we were deemed negligent, and those are disallowable from the contract. So we have to minus those things. Then we're going to add the pain gain share. So that's the pain gain share is the combined effect of both the 20% gain share, the 50% pain share, which is just wrapped into one item. So that's what I'm referring to there. But we also have to deduct any of liquidated damages, because again, the customer is not going to absorb those things at all under the contract. So we can then, that's how you can build up these kind of formulas, is just kind of like cross-referencing between each of these different things. And you'll see if I just click on a few. So this one is taking the period of time, the duration of the hammock cold liquidated damages, and it's just multiplying that up by 50,000 per day. So that's a much simpler one, but some of these other ones can be a little more complex. So we've got outturn costs minus target costs gives you your target cost deviation. So the outturn cost being whatever was simulated during any given iteration, but the target cost was defined as a variable. So it's like a static kind of number. So we can measure the deviation against that. So there's a whole bunch of things going on there. And of course, you look at your drivers and your distribution graphs, your sensitivity analysis, and all of these other aspects as required. One that I particularly like, though, is to look at the scatter plot, because then you can then bring up, again, things like on one axis, your time versus a particular measure on your cost, whether that is the risk analysis or as this one is looking at the percent margin, so how much money are we retaining, we can actually see that there is a trend over time. So as we are delayed, we are being punished, and we can see margin being eroded. So it's gone potentially as high as, like, what's this up here? It's like nearly 20 or something, right? If you get that to hover precisely over it, it pops up. That's a bit annoying. Anyway, but it comes down and you can see that 0, where we're not making any money, that's the point there. And thankfully, there's very few scatter plot items where we get so delayed that we are not losing any money. And therefore, when we're thinking of adding to our portfolio of projects, we're probably getting a good feeling, a good sense about this particular project. And we'd be welcoming it into the portfolio. We'd want to bid, we'd want to tender. So it helps us with that decision making. It looks like we're going to be making money on this project. So I think I'll stop there and invite a few questions.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think we've answered a few of the questions in the Q&A already. There's a couple of kind of other ones left, but I think maybe for the sake of time, we might park the questions until either provide written answers, or if we've got a bit of time at the end of my presentation, we can revert back to them, because otherwise it might be just one do and don't from me. But thank you very much, Chris. I think, as always, what's kind of hopefully clear to people is just the level of flexibility that you've got with this cost module. I think the idea that you need to have a separate tool for doing your cost risk modeling in Excel using at risk or model risk, I think is something which is increasingly redundant. And certainly speaking as someone who obviously used to work with Palisade for 11 years and spend a lot of time talking about at risk, I don't think there's anything that I've found that you can't do in Safran that you used to be able to do in at risk. It's just a question of having the imagination to do it. So thank you very much for that presentation. It gives some really kind of good ideas about some things like that. Okie dokie.
No
So let's take your presentation off the screen for now, and then let me share out my screen again. Okie doke. So the idea of this presentation was to give a few kind of do's and don'ts. But I think let's focus on the positives. Let's try some of the do's rather than the don'ts. I think the only don't I'd say is kind of following on from Chris's presentation is don't feel that you need to use Safran and at risk. You might as well just use Safran rather than having two different tools. And if I get the chance, I'll try and show a little bit of that during this presentation as well. So the idea here, and we did a similar webinar not so long ago, so there's going to be some things that were covered in that webinar. There's a little bit of duplication, but there's also a couple of new things that I wanted to kind of share with people in this particular session. But just before I do that, I think one thing that occurred to me is that there are almost certainly people on this call who maybe haven't had lots of experience with Safran. There's lots of people we know that are kind of expert practitioners looking for tips and tricks, but there will be some of you who maybe this is just dipping your toe in the water, looking to find out a little bit more about it. So if you are fall into that particular category, and you would like to arrange a demonstration of the software where we kind of run through all the functionality and give you a kind of like a high level overview of all the capabilities, please get in touch with Ferryfield, with Safran. We're always really happy to kind of talk till the cows come home, is the expression, about QRA. So if anybody ever wants a demonstration, please do get in contact with one of us. So let's kind of get to this then. So what I'm going to do, so I think it says 5 tips and tricks. So they're all going to be kind of meshed in one on top of another. They're not necessarily clearly delineated. But the person that I need to do, I'm going to bring in a little schedule. And I want to kind of talk about some kind of ideas around how we can start to move from having our deterministic schedule in P6 into one where we start throwing risks and uncertainties at it. And so I'm just going to import this very simple little example file that I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. And in fact, if you look at the list of my recent projects over here, you're gonna see the name drone written a few times. But essentially, it's a fairly simplistic project that I'm just going to import in and start doing a little bit of work with. And I'm going to give it a new name. I'm just importing it from P6 into my Safran database. I'm going to call this one Drone 30th of September 2025, so I don't accidentally overwrite anything that's in there already. And so this is a really small little model. There's 30 or so different activities, but often our clients work in environments where there's much bigger models with 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 activities. And so one of the key challenges, of course, is that as Mike said, what we don't necessarily want to do is just go plus or minus 10% on absolutely everything, because that's not necessarily going to give us a particularly realistic overview of things. And so I think that it's really important that we always try and focus on what's important in the model. If an activity is never on the critical path, then it's probably not going to have as much of an impact on your results, even if you put risks and uncertainty on it, as something which is on the critical path. And so the first thing I want to just talk about is this idea of being able to stress test the model. And so to kind of, when we receive a model like this, if we don't know anything at all about it, there's a really simple little tip that we can use to try and figure out whereabouts to start. And so for those of you who kind of haven't seen this already, the Safran has got this global risks area. And what the global risks area is, it's essentially a lessons learned library or database, so a repository for us to put our historic assumptions and so on. So I've got various risks and uncertainties in here, but I've also got this little stress test that I've set up. And so this could equally be an absolute distribution where it's maybe minus 20 days, plus 20 days. But for the purpose of this particular session, what we're going to do, we're going to take this and apply it to all of the activities in our schedule. And we're going to vary them by plus or minus 20%. We're going to run a simulation. And then what Safran is going to do, it's going to calculate how often these activities are on the critical path. So at the moment, you'll see we've got these zeros kind of everywhere on here. And this critical index, the risk critical index, is the field which Safran uses to tell us, or rather to track during a simulation, how often our activities fall on the critical path. And indeed, anything that starts with the word risk is generally something which Safran either uses an input for the simulation or gets calculated as a result of it. And so what's going to happen, I'm going to take that stress test, I'm going to apply it to all of the activities in the schedule, and then I'm going to see, or Safran's going to see rather, how often those activities fall on the critical path. And so if they vary by plus or minus 20%, how often are they cropping up? And of course, what that then does, it gives us a little starting point. Now, when I go to my project risks, I haven't got anything in here. I've literally just imported the schedule raw from P6. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this little drop down up here to bring that stress test across, and I'm going to include it in the project. And so now what we've got, I've got this stress test that I can use, and really simple. I can go to my risk mapping screen over here, which is where I can see all 30 of my activities in my schedule. And if I just click at the top, what's then happened is that that stress test has then been applied to those 30 different activities. So when I then go and run a simulation, if I just click step through and start going and run analysis, what you'll see is that those activities are now starting to move around a little bit as a result of that uncertainty. And so if I click on the word complete, then what we'll see if we go back into the schedule is that risk critical index. And actually, let me just zoom in a little bit more. I've got quite a big monitor here, but my eyes are not as young as they used to be, and so I should be cognizant that maybe some of you are on smaller screens, so I'll make this a little bit bigger. So what's just happened is that when we ran the simulation, Safran tracks the critical path, and so this number that we're seeing in this field here, in this column here rather, is a measure of the amount of time that activities fall on the critical path. And so the idea being is that maybe this is a good place to start, and we'll maybe come back and talk about why the Gantt chart now looks a little bit different in a little while. But it seems to me that maybe these are the ones where I might want to start thinking about uncertainties and risks, because those are the ones which are always on my critical path. So what I've then done, I've set up a little filter here, which in this particular case is enabling me to identify which activities are always on the critical path. So if we go to this filters option over here, you'll note there's actually quite a few different filter icons around, but it's this bottom right one down here. You can see that this is the filter that I've set up. So it's ones where the critical index is equal to 100, so they're always on my critical path. And actually, I've also said that I really just want to look for things that are in my prelims phase or my design phase. And actually, I happen to know that the activity IDs begin with an A or D for those. The reality is on the bit that I'm going to show next, I've got a space for eight different things. And so I needed to come up with a way to show just with 8 things. Oh, and also we've got another filter on here, which is another condition, which is saying that we just want to be looking at activities. We're not really interested in milestones and so on as well. So now what we've got is we've got a list of those 8 items which I want to maybe start thinking about some duration uncertainty for. And so I'm just going to put it on this outline view instead. And if I go to my risk mapping tab, you'll see that we've now got those different activities that are being shown on the on the schedule tab. So it pulls across, it filters according to whatever is shown on the schedule tab. Now I just want to do a couple of other things really quickly here. So first of all, I'm just going to add in a column for my duration, and also for my duration uncertainty. And so the idea here is that we can there's all sorts of different ways that we can get uncertainty onto our models. We can use the estimate uncertainties, or we can do this kind of line by line approach and take and add a distribution to these. And so the reason for this particular little segment is that I was doing a workshop the other day, and the clients were very keen on the idea of being able to come up with or for people to be able to talk about the uncertainty on an Excel sheet. So rather than having to do it within Safran, they wanted to be able to distribute a sheet to people, to their subject matter experts working on the project, planners, etc., get them to fill in the sheet and then import that into Safran, which is what we're going to the process that we're going to be looking at now. So we've got these 8 items on the screen. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go and click on export here. And what that's going to do, this is my risk mapping screen. And so it's going to export whatever is being shown on the screen at the moment in terms of the IDs and descriptions into Excel. And so if I just click to Excel, and we're going to ignore all the various things, the various files that are on my desktop at the moment, we're just going to call this, I don't know, risk mapping. Oops, my legendary poor typing skills on display for everyone on the call. I'm just going to call this one risk mapping export. So on my screen now somewhere, if I go and find it, wherever it is over here, oops, there we go. What I've now got is a list of those 8 activities that I'm kind of quite keen to get some input from my experts on the project around the duration uncertainties. So the next thing that we did, and this obviously came out of this workshop that I was doing, was to put together an Excel sheet that allows people to fill it in, and then we can just import that into Safran. And actually kind of worked on this with the excellent people in Safran support, and there's a knowledge base article about this, but obviously if people want to get a copy of the spreadsheet, we can arrange that and share that without any problem at all. So this is my template sheet here. So what I've essentially got, I've got a template which allows me to put in the activities which are important. In this particular case, the ones that are on the critical path 100% of the time in my first couple of phases. And then what we can do is we can fill this out and then get that information back into Safran. So the first thing I'm just going to do very quickly is I'm just going to take the I'm going to take my activities and my activity descriptions, and I'm just going to paste them into my sheet here. So now I've got the actual activities themselves, and actually what I might as well also do as well is if I just go to my schedule, I'm also just going to copy the durations and put those in there as well, and I'm going to use those as maybe my most likely values. So I've taken whatever the planner has as a starting point, and I'm going to kind of put those into my spreadsheet as well. So at this point, what Safran needs, if we want to use duration uncertainty, Safran needs to have that expressed as a formula to then be able to import back in. And so the first choice that we've got here is whether we're talking about a relative distribution or an absolute one. So an absolute distribution might be one where I choose a distribution, in this case, let's say a PERT distribution. And my planner said it was going to be 10 days originally, but maybe it's going to be as little as 8 days. Oops. And actually, I've just realized that these have all got numbers after them, which is slightly problematic. So let's take off the numbers and actually just have these expressed as actual values, because otherwise you can see that my concatenate formula has conveniently got that added in already. There we go, got some values. And maybe there's a maximum of 14 days. And so what the sheet does, it kind of combines all of that into the correct syntax for Safran to import. And so maybe I might go and do that for a couple of these items. Again, let's choose a PERT distribution, I know 25 days, 40 days, and so on. And so the idea is that this is something that we could maybe circulate to our experts. But sometimes maybe rather than using the absolute values, maybe we might be more interested in using the relative values. And so for this particular client, they had a set number of or set selection of ranges, and of course we could use this estimate uncertainty in Safran, which I'll come on to in a moment. But essentially, for each of their activities, if the planners weren't going to be using the absolute values, then maybe they just wanted to pick something from this selection here. And so for the ones where, in fact, let's put them always relative for now. Let's say that all of these are going to be, all of them are going to be relative values, and I'll just kind of show very quickly how it works. All we need to do then is just pick one of these values from over here. And at this point, there is supposed to be an autofill going on, but for some reason on here, these are not coming across automatically. So that's a slight little hampering of this particular bit. Let's kind of have a little look in over here instead. Let's see if I can find one that's. It's entirely possible that I was working on the wrong thing. So I'm very guilty sometimes of having all sorts of save as issues, and so it looks like maybe I was the one that I was just looking at there. It didn't have this particular formula in here, so that's why. Fortunately, as per the kind of the Blue Peter thing, here's one that I prepared earlier, which also demonstrates it as well. So the idea is that we pick whatever value we want to from here in terms of how confident we are in the estimate. And then from that, we have a lookup table which then auto fills those values, and of course they also then get added into here as duration uncertainty. So when we've got this, as Michael was saying, Safran's great because it when we use the import, it will ignore anything that it doesn't need, it doesn't use. And so in here, on the risk mapping sheet, all we're doing is we're just looking up the values that are on this kind of import sheet here, and it's filling them onto our the risk mappings worksheet. And so once we're done with that, if I just do a little save as, and let's just call it, I don't know, 1, 2, 3. And there is an element of live peril here. So there is a, so obviously I'm doing this with a different model to the one that I was thinking of. So fingers crossed this is all going to work okay. But what I'm going to do is, if I now, let's just turn off my little filter that I've got going on here, and I'll have all of my data back in my schedule. And then on the risk mapping screen here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to import. I'm going to click from Excel, and then whatever one that I just saved there. There was a nice little message that I was very pleased to see, which says all mappings imported successfully. And so although I completed this in Excel, I circulated it in Excel, we then just import it back into Safran, and now we've got our line-by-line estimate uncertainty into duration uncertainty rather into the model. So that's a kind of a really useful, pragmatic kind of way of being able to kind of bring in stuff from Excel. And of course, the other thing that we might want them to do is then maybe apply some kind of filters. So what are we going to do with all of the other ones? It's probably unrealistic that all of them are going to take exactly the amount of time that the planners think that they're going to take. So maybe we want to add a bit of uncertainty on top of those as well, just in case. And so, for example, here, what I could do, I could go and look for all the blanks. So these are then the activities where there hasn't been any uncertainty added on a line-by-line basis. And maybe what I'm going to do, I'm going to go and pull one of these estimate uncertainties I've got in my global risks in. I can bring them into my project risk tab. Oops, and whatever's just happened there. Okay, again, this is a live session, so when things are live, sometimes things happen that you don't expect. So let me just close down Safran, and let's just figure out what's going on there. Give us a moment, everybody. So one of the things that I'm notorious for doing is managing to break things with all sorts of overly creative imports and so on. So I'm just gonna reload that back up now, and get that back on the screen. So as I said, this is at least proof that this is live, and I'm not some kind of AI generated robot talking to you about this sort of stuff. So I'm just going to share out my screen again, and then let's jump back into that model. So maybe one of my tips and tricks here is don't actually try and show stuff live on a model during a presentation. Stick to PowerPoint. That should be one of the tips and tricks. All right, so let's kind of load this back up and see where we are with things. So what I was going to very, very quickly show was that if once we've got to this point where we've got our line level uncertainty within the model, and we've added our duration uncertainty into our model, one of the other things that we can do is we can start to look at costs and how we bring those into the model as well. And so let me just double check, because whereabouts are we? So I've got all sorts of stuff in here, and it looks like the things didn't save into my model. So that is a teeny little bit of a problem. So let's just quickly try and import that in again, and see how we get on. So apologies for the slight technical issues. Let me go over here, and let's try and import that in again. And fingers crossed, we're going to have better luck this time round. Okay, so we've got our data into here. And let's just change it to a more interesting layout. Okay, so for each of the activities in our schedule, we've now got some kind of duration uncertainty. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to apply a filter again, and I'm going to just look for the blanks in my model. And what I'm now going to do, I'm going to just bring something in which is going to allow me to have some kind, I guess, some kind of uncertainty for those tasks. So I've got this estimate uncertainty that I created in my global risks originally, which is maybe we're going to vary them by minus 25% plus 20%, which is quite significant. Maybe actually we'll go for maybe a high level of confidence, maybe minus 10 plus 10, like Michael was suggesting, is something which is sometimes common. So let's go for a low uncertainty, and we're going to include that. And so what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to apply that low level kind of that plus or minus 10% to each of these other activities. So what we then have, we have some of our activities which have got duration uncertainty, some activities which have got estimation uncertainty. And so now what we've got a model itself which is which has got uncertainty associated with the actual activities themselves. So we've got. So that's kind of one approach for getting our uncertainties in, rather than kind of having to do it within the tool itself. If we do it in Excel, we can then circulate that Excel model, get people to kind of buy and fill that in, import it into Safran, and then we have that data ready to use. So the next kind of tip and trick then is really, it kind of speaks to that kind of the idea that historically you might have had people doing their schedule risk analysis in PRA, and then doing the cost risk analysis in at risk or model risk or Crystal Ball, which Chris mentioned, which is a tool that I haven't heard for a long time. So it shows kind of how long Chris and myself have both been in the game, that Crystal Ball still being mentioned. But essentially, what's kind of quite common is that you might have the team doing the risk team doing all of their schedule risk analysis in Safran, but then the cost separately in Excel in at risk or something. And so what we've got here, we've got a really simple model that you the sort of thing that you might see in at risk, where we've got some risks that have been identified. Each of them has got some kind of a probability, and then we've got some kind of an impact if they occur. And if you're doing this in at risk, it might be written equal risk per 250, 320, 500. If it was in model risk, you might see it equals VOs per 250, 320, 500. But essentially, it's a standalone cost risk model. Now, one of the things that I really love about Safran is that it's really easy to bring information in, and then to kind of associate it with different other elements of our project. So we've got a schedule over here that's been imported from P6, in which we've chucked some uncertainty at. But what I'm also going to do, I'm going to bring in not that one. I'm going to bring in that cost risk, and I'm going to actually import that into Safran as well. And so we've got this import template sheet, which is how we can get information in and out of Safran. And so essentially we've got those same cost risks, those same 10 cost risks, but they've all been expressed in the Safran format over here. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go and import those cost risks, and I'm going to show what we can do with them in terms of the schedule. And so again, if I go to my project risk tab, if I go to import project risks from Excel, and I go and find my project risks, which are down here somewhere, I've now got those 10 different cost risks have now been imported into Safran. And so I can see all of those cost risks that were previously in Excel are now in Safran. Now, obviously, what I could do, I could just do a standalone risk register, and I'll show how I do that in a moment. But actually, because I've got a schedule here, what I wanted to do was actually to show that if we've got some cost risks, rather than just doing them in isolation, sometimes it's quite nice to locate them at a particular point in time. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my risk mapping screen over here. And I'm just going to collapse down my WBS to level 1. Well, actually, there we go. And I'm going to imagine that what I want to do is actually take my cost risks over here and apply them to different parts of my schedule. And so in a really kind of simplistic way, I'm going to say that my first two cost risks are in my prelims phase, the second one's in the design phase, fabrication phase, then the construction phase, and then testing and reconstruction down here. Now, when we use this risk mapping screen, it supports this kind of parent-child relationship. And so actually, these cost risks have been applied to each of these different activities down here. And so it might be the case that rather than doing it to the phase, I might want to apply them to a particular activity. Or indeed, if I wanted to apply them to a phase and lots of things in that, and lots of different activities within a phase, we also then have the ability to choose exactly whether we want that cost risk to be applied to absolutely every single activity, or maybe we want to have it to a maximum number of activities, or maybe we want the impact of it spread across a certain number of activities or all activities. You've got lots and lots of creative control over how this all works if you want to go down that route. But for now, I'm going to keep it very, very simple. I'm going to say that I want to just add those cost risks to those activities. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to run my analysis. And as well as having obviously the uncertainty around my finish date of my project, which came from the duration uncertainties, we've got a tab down here, which is my cost risk profile. And so when we map cost risks to the schedule using the risk mapping tab, what we can then see, of course, is whereabouts those cost risks have been mapped. And we can either look at them from the top level of the schedule, or we can look at them by phase, or even activity by activity level. Now, the key point here is that what we've got a P90 of just under 9 million. And so as a result of me running the risk register and applying it to the schedule, this gives me a P90 of 9 million. Now, of course, it's quite nice to be able to show what our risk exposure is per individual phase and so on, which I think is something which is really, really useful. But actually, what I wanted to just really quickly touch on here is that when we've got a schedule from P6 and a cost model or cost risk model from Excel, being able to combine them together in Safran is really straightforward and simple. Now we can, if we had a full cost model like Chris was talking about, we can have the actual schedule driving the cost. So if the activity takes longer, it's going to cost us more. But we're also able to link the impact of delays or time or risks with costs as well. And actually, if we go to the probabilistic cash flow tab here, what you're seeing is actually the effect of me tying those cost risks to particular activities. And so what we have, I'm just going to put it into maybe years rather than quarters. What we have here, we have quite a bit of information. I'm just going to kind of really quickly talk about what we're seeing on the screen, so you can hopefully see the value of it. So when we do a standalone cost risk analysis in at risk or model risk, we might end up with something like this distribution graph, which is all very nice, very useful, and so on, telling us what our cost risk exposure looks like. But if we do that, if we bring that into Safran and then we tag that to activities in the schedule, what we're then seeing is these bars, these three bars. This is the years of my project. So you can see the time horizon down here: year number 1, year number 2, year number 3. And there's obviously some uncertainty as to when those activities are going to happen, because we've got some duration uncertainty on the schedule which we've already applied. And so what these bars are showing us, they're showing us how much exposure we have to cost risks for each year of our project. So this is year number 1, this is year number 2, and this is year number 3. And so what we can see is this: our P50 in year number 1 is 483,000 or million. The P80 is 1.3, the P90 is 1.8, and the P99 is 2.7. So what we can see is that, you know, year number 1 and year number 3, we haven't got lots and lots of cost risk exposure, although there is obviously some variability. But there's in year number 2, because of the phases that we've tagged those risks to, we're carrying a lot more uncertainty. So we've got these are the periods. So year number 1, year number 2, year number 3. And then so that relates to the sort of y-axis over here. And then on the y-axis on the other side, that's our cumulative cost. And so these lines are showing us maybe how much we've spent by the end of year number 1, by the end of year number 2, and then the kind of the final point where these lines stop. That's the end of the project. And actually you can see that because we've got these what we call cost time scatters. And so this is where we're tracking cost and time on the same axis. And so when we look at this, the very last sample, the latest finish date for the project was there. And so that's why these lines kind of stop here. And so if we just scroll across a little bit, I just wanted to kind of highlight something which is I guess the value of this is that when we look at this in at risk or model risk, and we come up for P90 of 8.9 million, we can still see that in this approach, and we can see that actually by the end of the project, our P90 is 8.9 million, which is this point here. So we've got the same end point, but actually rather than having a stationary distribution just showing us how much contingency or how much exposure we've got for the project, we can actually see where that exposure lies, when it's broken down, how much we might need to budget as contingency for risks in a particular period of time, or indeed how much we're going to need to ask the Treasury for by a particular point in the project time horizon. So it doesn't take much to do that. You get your cost risks into Excel, we import them into Safran, you tie them to relevant parts of the project, and then being able to see this approach, I think, is something which is really, really useful and beneficial. Now, there has, believe it or not, probably been maybe 3 or 4 different things that I just kind of highlighted there. The only thing that I didn't get around to was talking about the some confidence intervals on the Gantt chart, but I think maybe that's going to have to wait for another day because I've got a few messages telling me I need to hurry up. So I think I should probably stop there for now. But there we go. Let's wrap up on that. So I'll just have a quick kind of look at the questions. In estimate uncertainty, what's the difference between relative and absolute value? Okay, so the relative value is one which, like the name suggests, we relate it to something else. So in this case, we relate it to our original duration or cost, if we were talking about cost that's in the model. So if we've got a duration of 10 days and we have a relative distribution between 80%, 100% and 150%, what we're doing when we run a simulation, Safran relates that 80, 100%, 150% to the original sample. So if it samples at 80%, it's 8 days. If it's 150%, it's 15 days. If it's 130%, it's 13 days, and so on. So we would express so we essentially apply a range of samples to our original assumption. Now, with an absolute distribution, what we'd be doing, instead of having a range, we would actually give samples for what we want our distribution parameters to look like. So rather than saying 80%, 150%, we would instead say we want for that particular activity, it's going to be 8 days, but we're going to have a minimum of 8 days, and most likely of 10 days, and a maximum of 15 days, and express those as absolute numbers rather than relative percentages. And the relative percentages can be a really good way of applying a whole load of uncertainties to a group of activities. But if you want to be more precise, then you might want to use the absolute ones for a line by line. Okay, so I think that's there may be some other questions, but I think for now we should probably park mine. Are we going for a break next, Craig?
Yeah, I think thanks Doug, thanks Chris for those valuable tips and gems. Definitely the to-dos and not to-dos and etc. Yeah, I think we'll just break for a couple of minutes to give people a time to grab a cup of tea. But maybe this time we'll just a couple of minutes, and then we'll start up with Mark's presentation. Mark Turner will be next.